the idea that there was sort of potential domestic pressure there because of gas prices and not wanting an endless war. And up until that point, with U.S. war goals being so vague, it's not clear there is an end in sight because they haven't really enunciated a clear end point for this. That's why everyone is guessing. And I think you see with each different official saying different things sometimes, it's difficult to try and gauge that.
Well, it's interesting because if you look at the reaction in markets, it's clear that investors are hinging on every word that comes out of the president's mouth. But from your perspective, what chapter of the war do you think that we're in based on the people that you're speaking with? Are we maybe escalating, holding steady here? What are you gathering?
Yeah, I think from everything that we on our national security team and others from Bloomberg's bureaus around the world are hearing is that this is that the U.S. and Israeli attacks are sort of continuing apace. The Iranian retaliation, which of course affected global energy markets when they were sending these one-way attack drones, into Qatari energy facilities, Saudi energy facilities, threatening the Strait of Hormuz, which effectively remains almost entirely shut. The pace of the Iranian retaliation has maybe diminished slightly, but no one is really totally sure whether that's because they're conserving weapons in this fight, or whether they are, depleted or diminished in terms of their ability to fire them. And I think right now, a lot of the observers tend to think it seems to be that they are holding their firepower, keeping the powder dry a little bit, because unlike back in June when the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran's nuclear facilities, and Iran responded with a massive volley all at once, and most of their missiles and other things were shut down or shot down. Now they're sort of sending them in consistent, different volleys at different countries, and it's a tactic that is potentially draining U.S. resources and munition stockpiles and their ability to actually shoot these things down.
Yeah, above and beyond the war itself, what kind of blows my mind is we continue to remind everybody that even though this, we just see the stockpiles of military equipment and weapons that many nations around the world have, including the United States. Hey, one of the things I want to ask you, and just the optics before we wind up, is we did see the U.S. Navy escort an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz. This oil, my understanding, not headed to the U.S. I think it might be headed to China or elsewhere. And I keep thinking about the optics as President Trump gets ready at the end of this month to go visit with President Xi. This war, I think many would still ask why. But I do wonder about the signal around the world, a message perhaps to China. Just to wrap up, some final thoughts here.
Yeah, it's very clear that most of the oil and natural gas coming out of the Persian Gulf and going through the Strait of Hormuz is going to Asia. A lot of that going to China, some of it going to Japan, elsewhere. I think the market has not yet been convinced by U.S. pledges to keep the strait open. The U.S. Navy escorts, the trying to get the Development Finance Corporation here in D.C., which is a relatively small agency, to try and take on sort of global insurance or reinsurance schemes to try and get these ships moving through the strait.
Right.
None of that has been convincing to the market so far. The only thing that's been convincing to the market so far is Trump pledging that the war is going to wind down soon.
Yeah.
And then, of course, today we had Hexas saying, it's the most intense day so far, and they're continuing, and the rest of it. So no one knows at the moment.
No, it's really, kind of mind-boggling. But as you say, there's more of a risk on trade, certainly, when it comes to the equity markets and some other asset classes. Ian, thank you so much. Bloomberg News national security editor. I do want to dig a little bit deeper into the markets. The U.S. war in Iran, the AI trade, talk of stagflation, and more that's coming at investors. A great voice. Kevin Gordon is with us. He's head of macro research and strategy at Schwab. He's right here here in studio.
guys.
Oh, hi.
Nice to see you.
It's a shame nothing's going on.
Just a few
So
things.
quiet.
Just a few things.
So tell us how you and the team are like thinking about everything. What really matters? What are you waiting to see if it matters longer term?
I mean, similar to what a lot of people are waiting to see the sort of scale and the persistence of this. And I think especially in market terms, and these are always uncomfortable situations because you never want to have to think only in market and economic terms. There's always
There's
the
people,
humanity aspect.
right.
But to some extent, they're actually tied together in terms of the economy, angle. So I do think that, from our standpoint, the ultimate impact to the U.S. economy, because that's ultimately, what we mainly focus on, but of course the global economy. I think that you could sort of see it in market pricing, both when we were going through the more aggressive risk-off scenario, but also even today, something like European natural gas futures versus U.S. I mean, you could see the more sharp decline in Europe,
Right.
Versus what was happening, on the upside. That to me sort of explains and kind of hints at, the U.S. being a little bit more insulated relative to the rest of the world. But I do think it's, we have to keep in mind, even if oil were to not move much from here, it would still mark a pretty big increase
Right.
over where we
Yeah.
were just a couple of weeks
We're
ago.
up like
Absolutely.
60% year to date or
Absolutely.
something like that.
So the
Stunning
shock
numbers.
is still there. It's just
Yeah.
obviously not as severe. So this is sort of where the emotional and psychological, part of it comes in. It's not 120, it's down to 80. But up from 60 is still pretty tough, especially for headline
Do you
inflation.
think stagflation? Do you even?
Well, to me, it depends on what definition of stagflation you want to assign, because if you were around in the 70s and the 80s and you use the unemployment rate plus the CPI rate as your definition of stagflation, we're still pretty far from that because unemployment is still quite low relative to history.
Right.
If you're going to use a time frame over the past say 6 months and you're going to look directionally, where has inflation been trending, where has the labor market been trending, then you could say there has been a little bit of a stagflationary impulse because the unemployment rate has been grinding higher. Inflation's also been grinding higher, closer to 3%, a full percentage point above the Fed's target. So I think it just depends on, number one, the time frame you want to use, and then number two, also sort of the background
So which one
conditions.
do you use? So do you say yes or no?
I say there's certainly been an impulse of that.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
there's been sort of a hint of it in a tinge, but I don't think that it's anything to be, alarm. It's not capital
Yeah.
S stagflation in terms of the 70s or the 80s.
So, how do you play this market, given that we've been dealing with so many bouts of uncertainty? I mean, this is not the first chapter of uncertainty
Yeah.
that we've been seeing recently.
For us, we haven't really adjusted anything, and we don't suggest that clients do the same, especially in these kinds of
Nothing
instances.
since the start of the year.
No, I mean,
Yeah,
we've sort of
okay.
came into the year relatively constructive on, outside of the U.S. from a stock market perspective, not against the U.S., but we just felt that, given some of the growth impulses you're seeing around the world prior to this, especially in Europe and parts of Asia, the weak dollar story last year, of course, was a really
Right.
huge support to ex-U.S. stocks, but we sort of felt that was transitioning a little bit to the growth side of things, so you started to see a little bit of a broader base of support. Still feel that way today, so we haven't really changed any of that. I think that from a broad perspective, somebody who's looking at a lot of this geopolitical instability, the framework that I've sort of used for myself, and I think that most people, hopefully it's helpful over the past year, has been this distinction between what is the front page risk and what is the bottom line risk. Because at the end of the day, as uncomfortable as it may seem,
Yeah.
if you're looking at this in a dispassionate way like markets are, they're really only caring about how much of the hit to earnings is actually going to manifest, if at all. So if this is a short-term conflict, which yes, if we do get some energy spikes, not to be dismissed, but if it's ultimately not going to be a growth hit to the economy and just a little bit more of an inflation shock, I think that the market ultimately looks through that, as uncomfortable as it may be.
So how long does this war have to go on? Like, when do you guys start to say, okay,
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to, I think that a scenario of, Brent crude eventually creeping back up towards, I don't know, in the 80 to 90 range, but hovering there.
Okay.
I do think that puts more of a pinch on the consumer. And especially,
Yeah.
I was actually just going through some great analysis from the Bloomberg economics team right before this, looking at sort of that break-even price for Brent and the tax refunds coming from the big, beautiful bill.
Yeah.
And we're essentially right here at these levels at that break-even point. So I do think that it starts to eat into some of that stimulus that's coming to the consumer, especially a consumer base that is devoting a much higher share of their spending and their income on energy versus, the wealthier share.
So, based on that potential bear case scenario, how would you strategically realign where you put your money, where you invest capital?
Well, I don't think that there needs to be some sort of major realignment. I think that the realignment would come if there was a big shift in the growth trajectory of the U.S. Because coming into this, as weak as the labor market has been and as fragile it's been, there were a lot of signs of some stabilization.
Right.
Even if you take January and February combined for U.S. payrolls for both of those reports. I think you could make the case that January was probably overstated in terms of the strength. February was overstated in terms of the weakness. So you add both of those together, you're probably close to that break-even rate for payrolls around 50,000, considering what the unemployment rate did for both. You have seen a little bit of a stabilization in private payrolls. Not to say that everything is totally fine, but I think some of that fragility was sort of easing by last fall. So as long as this shock doesn't affect that scenario and that picture for labor, which of course it could, but we haven't seen the signs yet because it hasn't been long enough for us to see. As long as that doesn't happen, then I don't think there needs to
Right.
be some sort of major realignment for a portfolio.
What's more interesting to you? I mean, obviously, we just talked about the war in Iran. And again, taking out the humanity and the cost of people and lives impacted as a result. But there's the AI trade. There's the worries about private credit. What is it that you think is something investors should pay more attention to? And just get about a minute or so left.
I think AI from the standpoint of how it's starting to move through the economy and move through
Yeah.
the market. And one of the distinctions and sort of points of emphasis we've been making has been, if you do believe that it's starting to diffuse throughout the economy, you're starting to see a lot of the benefits of this technology
Yeah.
and this capture. It may not be the best from a cap-weighted index perspective, because if you thought that tech and communication services were sort of the big drivers and the big players at the outset, not to say that they don't participate, but if they're taking a little bit more of a back seat, giving way to the rest of the market, so breadth looks relatively solid, those other parts of the market are just not as big to power your traditional, cap-weighted S&P 500 higher, at least to the degree that we've been used to over the past couple of years. So not to say that the market does poorly, but I think
Right.
that's an aspect to consider if you're a believer that this continues to move throughout the economy and benefit, the rest of the market.
I agree with you. I feel like the AI conversation is changing in a big way, and
Yeah.
I've had conversations about vertical AI and
Yeah, yeah.
and the large language models. Maybe we could be moving off of that in
Yeah.
a big way. Kevin Gordon, thank you so much.
So good to see you guys.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you
great
for
to see-
having me.
Always.
In your new
Always.
home, too. I love it.
You like what we've done with
I
the
love it.
place?
I love it.
Here's head of macro research and strategy at Schwab. Always a favorite when he joins us. Hey, coming up next, we're going to head to Tim Stenovec. He's down in Florida, my co-host. He's talking about prediction markets and more. That when we continue.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 index has just turned negative, and West Texas Intermediate crude has now pared its decline to 10%. Lots of moving parts. A source tells Bloomberg there was no U.S. escort of an oil tanker through Hormuz. Lots of immediate market reaction. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index has trimmed its loss. Oil pares losses amid that report of no U.S. Navy escort. West Texas Intermediate down 9.9% right now, 85.31 a barrel. Did dip briefly below 80. Brent, the global benchmark, just above 90 right now, down 8.8%. And as I mentioned at the top, S&P 500 index just turning negative right now. The S&P down by 0.1%. The Dow holding on to a gain barely, up under 0.1%. S&P, by the way, down 3 points. NASDAQ up by 0.1%. The VIX at 25. The 10-year 4.14%. Spot gold is up 0.9%. 51.86 the ounce on spot gold. And again, West Texas Intermediate crude. Everybody's focused on what's happening with crude. WTI down 10% right now, 85.22 a barrel. Brent, the global benchmark, at 90 even now, down by 9%. Bitcoin trading higher by 1.7%. Bitcoin 70,185 on Bitcoin. Amazon has kicked off what is likely to be one of the biggest corporate bond offerings ever. Amazon shares higher now by 0.2%, and Salesforce is planning to sell as much as $25 billion of debt to fund a share buyback. Salesforce down by 2.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. Carol and Nora, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pellet. Charlie mentioned we are watching the oil markets. This as Energy Secretary Chris Wright apparently said the U.S. Navy escorted an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz, announcing the news in social media on a post that was apparently deleted minutes later. Wright didn't identify the tanker in the post on X or say anything to suggest that a wider escort program is now in place. As our team is reporting out, the subsequent disappearance of the post and its accompanying video added confusion to what, as you know, has been a bit of a tense oil market, a volatile oil market that's moved around a lot, that is really looking for a confirmation of efforts by the Trump administration to unblock millions of barrels of Middle East oil trapped inside the Persian Gulf. In terms of the trade, Nor, we have seen it bounce around. We're still down about 10%. When I look at the trade, but we have been down a bunch more. I think we went below $80 a barrel. Let me just pull it up on the Bloomberg. We've been down as much as 19% at $76.73 a barrel. We're still down about 10%, but now at 84 and change.
We've been seeing some really wild swings. I mean, everyone really hinging on every headline that's coming out as we continue to monitor developments in the Middle East, and it's certainly trickling through into markets as we're continuing to see this volatility playing out in oil.
And some would say concerns when an official is putting this out. And so obviously investors and all of us are kind of taking heed of it. All right. Anyway, that post is removed, and we have seen oil markets still down for the day, but they're definitely off their earlier lows. We want to switch gears a little bit, talk about something that we talk a lot more about, and that is prediction markets. They allow people to bet on real-world events, traders buying and selling event contracts that pay out $1 if the event occurs. The industry has grown rapidly. Platforms such as Polymarket and Kalshi processing billions of dollars in volume every week, financial giants and sports betting firms taking notice. There are a lot of critics out there, though, as we know as well, that they say that prediction markets can have the same consequences as gambling and raise concerns about insider trading, manipulation, and the lack of consumer protections, despite being regulated differently than traditional gambling. And both of the prediction platforms are not the same. These are just some of the topics that are coming up at the FIA Global Cleared Markets Conference. It's underway in Boca Raton, Florida. And in the thick of it all is my partner and co-host, Tim Stenovic, who earlier hosted a panel that included really a who's who when it comes to global markets, including the Kalshi CEO, Tarek Mansour. And he weighed in on the environment right now for prediction markets and also working with regulators.
There is Kalshi, which is regulated, US-based, committed to the rule of law, under Biden, under Trump, under any administration. We will always be committed to this, and we'll be working with regulators for rulemaking. But there are others in this space that are based offshore in Panama that are doing, I honestly don't know what they're doing.
All right, that, of course, is the Kalshi CEO, Tarek Mansour. Let's head to Boca Raton, Florida, and to check in with Tim. I heard you saying it was hot and humid. I figured the sunglasses had to come out.
Loving it.
Tell us about the event.
I mean, you were right by saying it's a who's who. Everybody's here, from regulators, attorneys, the heads of some of the biggest brokerages, exchanges. On that panel that included Tarek Mansour of Kalshi, we had Terry Duffy of CME, Adina Friedman of the NASDAQ, Thomas Book of Deutsche Börse in Germany. We had the CEO of SGX, which is the Singapore Stock Exchange. So it's really a group of traditional, like you'd think about them as exchanges, brokerages, but also this new element. And you really touched on that, Carol, when you were talking about prediction markets, because that is really the conversation happening here right now. It's all about how do we regulate these things, and what does it look like for a traditional, or, I don't want to say old school exchange, but a more traditional exchange to move into this new kind of world.
So, did attendees and those speaking at the conference, did you get a sense of optimism or a more cautious approach when we think about the future of prediction markets?
Everybody's very optimistic right now. And you kind of look no further than the regulatory environment. Earlier in the day, I sat down with the chairman of the CFTC, Michael Seelig, and he and the Trump administration, to be fair, has really been seen as totally friendly to how these prediction markets operate. So Kalshi, for example, is regulated by the CFTC, and that's different than a so-called gambling platform like a FanDuel or a DraftKings. And those gambling platforms do not like that. Those companies can't even operate in every state in the country right now. They have to get state-by-state regulation. The people who use those platforms, Nora, they have to be 21 years or older. Kalshi, meanwhile, you can kind of do the same thing, but it's a prediction or so-called prediction. You could just have to be 18 years old. You can do it anywhere in the U.S., and you can make a bet, make a wager on who you think is going to be champion of the Final Four this year. So I would say that there's a lot of optimism around that. A lot of optimism, too, around tokenization, a lot of optimism around 24/7 trading and an always-on world that kind of comes from the crypto world. And in fact, earlier today, I sat down with Tim McCourt. He's CME Group Senior Managing Director and Global Head of Equity, FX, and Alternative Products. And I posed this question to him, guys. I said, how do you have your risk infrastructure in an always-on world? Because if we think about trading, there are breaks. There are ways when they can update technology. And, in an always-on world, that's different. Here's what he had to say.
I think when we look at the need for 24/7 risk management and access in crypto, it's really working with our customers, our clearing members, and market participants to understand what their needs are, and then work with them in a thoughtful, intentional manner to deliver that solution in a way that not only comports with their risk management need, does so in a way that gives them the opportunity to meet their standards, to meet the needs of their end clients. And it's really working together with the ecosystem and all of our clients to make sure we do it in a thoughtful way and giving everyone advance notice to be prepared for May 29th.
So what does risk infrastructure look like in an always-on environment? Like, we're thinking clearing members, brokerage firms, compliance teams, tech vendors. Like, what does that look like at CME?
Yeah, I think, the way we're approaching risk on the weekend in this risk-on environment, and it's always being on for the uncertainty that clients are facing any given day of the week, it's really about taking all of that infrastructure that we've built, those risk protections, the way to access this market at CME Group from across the globe, and just availing it now on Saturday and Sunday. It's not necessarily building different protocols, but it's more about extending them onto the Saturday and Sunday session and taking all those lessons that we've learned from managing that risk and providing that trusted, transparent, and efficient solution that people have been accustomed to at CME Group, and just extending it a few extra trading sessions, but doing it in a way that delivers them that confidence for customers to manage their risk.
Well, that was Tim McCourt, CME Group Senior Managing Director, Global Head of Equity, FX, and Alternative Products here from FIA Boca. And what you'll notice he said is, and it's interesting because a lot of people have made the point that it's not as easy as flipping a switch to go from 24/7 to, or to go from, 23/5, as they call it here, to 24/7. But he basically said all elements are in place. So when there is regulatory approval, they're going to be able to go ahead and he said there is demand from clients for this type of product.
Tim, I got to say, I was listening to your panel when it got away. It was a great discussion, and I feel like this is something that's increasingly creeping in when we talk about traditional markets, what's going on with prediction markets. But I feel like there was a little bit of tension battling about gambling, not gambling, and even the Kalshi head like pushing back and being like, well, what about these options, or what about this? Isn't that gambling? Like, it was really fascinating to see a little bit of the tension or hear the tension.
Yeah, it was a good moment, and I did what Carol, I have to say, what you are so good at during these panels, and that's getting the audience involved. And I thought to myself, okay, what can I ask the audience that's kind of controversial? And it's kind of simple right now, because the biggest question that this company faces is this gambling or is it not gambling? There are lawsuits in several states, like the state of Nevada is suing the company because Nevada is a gaming place. So it's in their best interest to try to promote companies inside of the state, and ostensibly this takes away from that. But you're absolutely right. So you might have seen Terry Duffy of the CME Group, and also Adena Friedman, the CEO of NASDAQ. They both raised their hand, and they agreed with about 30% of the people in the crowd that yes, making a wager on who is going to win in March Madness on Kalshi is considered gambling. And that is the tension. That is the big question that Kalshi is going to have to answer to, and that's the big question that regulators are going to have to answer. And many people, including Terry Duffy, think the Supreme Court will have to answer that question.
Well, all right, we're going to leave it there. Hey, listen, I can't wait to hear more and when you're back here, because I feel like this is certainly one of the big topics already of 2026. And it's just interesting to see how much investors, or maybe, do they want this? And I wonder where it all goes. But it's interesting to see the establishment embrace it. Wear sunscreen, kiddo. I'm just going to say that.
I have been. Do not worry. Headed to the airport, so I'll see you guys tomorrow. Nora, thank you for jumping in for me. I appreciate it.
All right,
Absolutely.
good stuff. Good stuff. Safe travels. Of course, Tim Stenovec there at the FIA Global Cleared Markets Conference. Hey, just want to point out that underway, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at the Daily Press Briefing making a lot of comments, and she has mentioned that the U.S. Navy offered to escort tankers when necessary. She said that the president is not afraid to use options on oil, that the initial Iran war timeline was 4 to 6 weeks, and says the objectives executed ahead of schedule in the Iran war. She did mention that post by the U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright was taken down, and she confirmed that the United States has not escorted a tanker through Hormuz. Let's actually head to Caroline Leavitt in the White House press room.
When those objectives are met, the president will dictate the end of these operations when he deems that Iran no longer poses a credible threat to the United States of America. And again, it goes back to, what does that unconditional surrender look like? Iran can talk all they want, and their words will be very empty when we've completely annihilated their navy, as we are doing, when we've taken out the threat of their ballistic missile capability, when we can firmly, finally ensure that they can no longer make a nuclear bomb to threaten the United States and our allies and our troops in the region. And that's what President Trump is ultimately seeking to do with respect to this operation. Jennifer.
There was a shooting outside of a synagogue in Baltimore. Do you know if the president has been briefed on that, and do you have any more details on what happened?
I don't, but we certainly will get you more details, Jennifer. And I don't know if the president has briefed, but I'll check on that when I get back to the Oval Office after this. Sure.
Thanks, Caroline. The president said yesterday for the first time that he had to strike Iran because he believes that Iran was going to strike U.S. targets within 7 days. And then he bumped that down later to 3 days. Where is he getting that?
Well, that's not the first time the president has said that he chose to launch Operation Epic Fury because he felt as though Iran was going to strike the United States and our assets in the region first. Again, I addressed this in the last briefing. This was a feeling the president had based on facts provided to him by his top negotiators who had been engaged with the Iranian regime in a good faith effort. The Iranian regime was lying, deceiving the United States of America, clearly trying to continue their nuclear program to create a a bomb that would, of course, threaten the United States of America. Again, their ballistic missile arsenal, they were rapidly and aggressively increasing that by the month to a place where they would essentially build immunity for themselves, where a future president or President Trump would not be able to launch this incredibly successful operation. And so the president, again, as I have reiterated and he has said, was not going to sit back and allow the Iranian regime to threaten or to attack the United States of America any longer.
But there are no U.S. leaders or Israeli leaders who are making those same claims. So is he making this up to justify his decision to go to war now?
The president is not making anything up, Nancy. He is looking at this every single day based on intelligence, based on facts, and based on intelligence that he himself and his negotiators have consumed based on their, again, negotiations with the rogue Iranian regime over the past year. And the president and his team tried in a good faith way to reach a diplomatic deal through peaceful means with the Iranian regime. And Iran chose this path to death and destruction. Iran wanted to attack the United States of America, and the president was not going to sit back and allow that to happen. He was not going to sit back and allow that to happen, and everyone in this room should be grateful for it. John.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Two questions for you. One has to do with a follow-up to your statement that you made at the beginning of the briefing regarding the Save America Act.
Sure.
Yesterday, the Senate Majority Leader John Thune spoke on the effort to potentially have a filibuster broken, the rules for the filibuster broken. He said the votes aren't there, one, to nuke the filibuster, and the votes aren't there for a talking filibuster. He says that's the reality. What's your reaction to what Senator Thune said?
Look, I think President Trump, the urgency behind his need to pass the Save America Act and his desire to get this country-saving legislation passed has been made quite clear. He wants all options on the table, and he wants the Senate to move as quickly as possible through whatever means necessary.
And then secondly, just regarding the president's trip tomorrow, looking ahead, why Ohio and why Northern Kentucky?
Well, why not? These are two great states with great Americans.
Just wanted to know why they were chosen.
Great states with great Americans. The president will be joined by lawmakers from both states who he greatly admires and respects and supports. And he'll be meeting with business owners in both of these places and talking about the economy, which is, of course, the utmost importance to him.
Caroline.
Thank you. Last week, the Energy Secretary issued a waiver for India to get oil, Russian oils, during this energy crisis.
Yes.
Have you spoken to President about it? What's the idea behind this?
Have I spoken to the president about it?
Yeah.
Yes, I have spoken to the president about it. And the president and the Secretary of Treasury and the whole national security team came to this decision because our allies in India, as you know, Lalit, have been good actors and have previously stopped buying sanctioned Russian oil. So as we work to appease this temporary gap of oil supply around the world because of the Iranians, we have temporarily permitted them to accept that Russian oil. And this Russian oil was already at sea. It was already out on the water. So this short-term measure, we don't believe it will provide significant financial benefit to the Russian government at this time.
I have one more question about Pakistan. You know, Pakistan is a neighbor of Iran, and Pakistan is also an ally of U.S. President has been praising a lot about the field marshal. Is Pakistan providing any kind of support in this war against Iran?
That I will have to check on with the Pentagon and get back to you. Sure.
The president said yesterday that President Putin told him he wanted to be helpful in the Middle East. The Kremlin put out a statement where Putin said, quote, "I would like to reaffirm our unwavering support for Tehran and our solidarity with Iranian friends." How does the president think that Russia could be helpful, if not helping Iran? And did the president push Putin on Russia sharing intelligence with Iran in this war?
The president and his special envoy Witkoff have both said that, of course, they've sent a message to Russia that if that was taking place, it's not something they would be happy with, and they hope that it is not taking place. As for further details about the discussions between these two leaders, I'll leave it to the president to divulge any more of that conversation, but he did confirm it yesterday and provided you with a little bit of the background and his view and his perspective, as he always does. Luke.
Regarding the missile strike on the Iranian school, how long does the administration expect that investigation to take, and will the White House or the Department of Defense release a full report of its findings once the investigation is complete?
The Department of War will do that. The investigation continues, and as the president said yesterday at his press conference, he will accept the conclusion of that investigation, whatever it may be. We'll go to the back row for some love. Sure, in the back with the glasses. Go ahead.
Regarding the Shield of the
Sitting down.
Americas.
Caroline,
is
and
there
then you can go, but go first.
Okay, thank
is
you.
Is there an update regarding
You have rough real estate back there, so I'm
is
trying to give you
is
some
there an
love.
update regarding Cuba, and also is an economic deal imminent?
Sure. I don't have any updates on Cuba for you today. Obviously, this is something the administration is actively dealing with. The president's made it quite clear it's his belief, based on fact, that the Cuban regime is bound to fall. The country is obviously in a very weak place, economically speaking. The people are crying out for help, and the president believes and knows that the Cuban regime wants a deal. So, as you know, Secretary of State Rubio has been engaged in those conversations as directed by the president. I don't have any updates for you today, though.
Thank you, Caroline. Regarding
Sure.
the Shield of the Americas, the initiative by President Trump this weekend, big names, a lot of countries, but some notable absences. For instance, Colombia, which is a key ally with the United States in terms of counter-narcotics. And President Gustavo Petro was here at the White House, and he met with President Trump. Why wasn't Colombia invited to the Shield of the Americas?
I don't think we're seeing the level of cooperation we quite want to see yet from the Colombian government to invite them to the Shield of America's event in PACT, but we certainly hope that this newfound organization will expand and we can continue to invite additional member countries. But there was quite a few countries there. I believe there were 17 countries represented, 12 heads of state with the president over the weekend. They signed a defense agreement with all of our militaries to emphasize the need to combat drug cartels through Latin America in the Western Hemisphere, and ultimately, of course, to curb the illegal trafficking of drugs to the United States, which is the president's utmost priority in all of this. So it was a great event on Saturday, and we look forward to the coalition expanding. Kelly in the back.
Caroline, thank you. Good to see you. I want to get back to another question that was asked earlier. It talked about the political aspects, but there's also the ideological and the spiritual aspects of what Iran has said for 47 years. Death to America, death to Israel. And we've just finished talking about the fact that terror has been around the world. Iran has been the nexus of that in so many ways. Has the president stated clearly to the American people why this is such an imminent threat in order for Democrats on Capitol Hill and Republicans and the American people to understand how imminent the threat was?
I think he has, Kelly. I mean, you've heard from the president on an almost daily basis over the course of the past 10 days. You've heard it from me at this podium. You've heard it from the Secretary of War, the Secretary of State, the Vice President of the United States. You know, the president's top cabinet and his officials have been repeatedly explaining to the American public the threat that Iran has posed to our country in this moment, but of course, over the course of the past 47 years. And their words, again, chanting death to America, speak for themselves. Go ahead. You can follow up.
Why the division within the American people? I realize that we have the people are talking about the War Powers Act. They're talking about all kinds of issues. But have people forgotten just how imminent that threat was? If they keep saying death to America and death to Israel, they mean it.
Look, I don't think the American people have forgotten, but I think Democrats on Capitol Hill, they have not forgotten, but they are just so plagued with this resistance to President Trump on everything that they do that, again, they can't even rally behind the common sense, bipartisan, long-standing principle of the United States of America that Iran absolutely poses a threat to the United States, that Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. And I think that's reflected, again, in their voting pattern. In 2023, every single member of the House of Representatives, with the exception of one, I believe the final vote was 412 to 1 in 2023 for a resolution condemning Iran as the world's state leading sponsor of terror. And now in this year, under this president in 2026, 53 Democrats voted against that exact same resolution with the exact same language. I don't think that's a change in the threat that Iran has posed to the United States. I think it's a change in the Democrat Party's thinking and their vicious hatred for President Trump. Danny? Sure.
National threat level, following on Kelly, what's the national threat level right now because of this death to America, death to Israel issue?
I believe the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI have repeatedly and continuously provided updates on the threat level to the homeland. I don't want to speak on it out of turn from up here, but of course, the federal government is continuing to coordinate and partner with local law enforcement agencies across the ground to thwart potential threats to the homeland. This is something the administration obviously takes very seriously. We are thwarting threats that, frankly, most Americans don't know about because they never make headlines, but that's the great work that the Department of Homeland Security is doing, and it emphasizes and underscores the point of why Democrats need to fund and reopen fully the Department of Homeland Security right now. Danny.
School. Why did President Trump say yesterday that Iran may have Tomahawk missiles when there are only 3 other U.S. allies plus the U.S. that have those missiles and therefore could...
Look, again, as the president said yesterday, he will accept the conclusion of this investigation by the Department of War. I know there's been a lot of speculation in the media about who may be responsible for this. We're not going to get ahead of the Department of War and the conclusion of that investigation. The president has a right to share his opinions with the American public, but he has said he'll accept the conclusion of that investigation. And frankly, we're not going to be harassed by the New York Times, who's been putting out a lot of articles on this, making claims that have just not been verified by the Department of War, to quickly wrap up this investigation because the New York Times is calling on us to do so.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. Carolyn, with the DHS currently under a partial Democrat shutdown, does the administration have any specific concerns about potential impact on Homeland Security or intelligence monitoring of sleeper cells inside the United States? And do you have any comment on the bombing, the 2 individuals that bombed New York City or tried to?
Yeah, it was absolutely despicable to see that attack in New York City. I know the FBI is investigating, and the Department of Justice and SDNY have announced they are charging those 2 individuals and alleged terrorists, and I know they won't rest until justice is sought in this case. Daniel.
Thank you, Caroline. Appreciate it. Millions of Americans are filing taxes for the first time since the president signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act into law. New reports say that new IRS data says that the average federal tax refund is around $3,800, a little bit up from the last period of last year. Does the president believe that the average federal tax refund increasing this year could provide a little bit more economic growth, something that he's been very focused on as the year progresses?
Absolutely. And Americans are going to start benefiting from the fruits of President Trump and Republicans' labor through the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill and these historic tax cuts. We are midway through tax season, so just to provide an update from the Treasury Department that just went out moments ago, nearly 63.5 million tax returns have been processed thus far, 45% of the anticipated total number of tax returns by April 15th, so don't forget to file your taxes, people. And the average refund this year is more than $3,700. And we know that more than 27.5 million individuals who have filed their tax returns thus far have claimed at least one of President Trump's new tax cuts. Over 3.5 million returns have claimed no tax on tips. Over 15.5 million returns have claimed no tax on overtime. Over 9.2 million returns have claimed the enhanced deduction for seniors. And over 690,000 returns have claimed no tax on car loan interest. And another amazing statistic, nearly 3.5 million Trump accounts have been opened for children in our country thus far. So we look forward to, I know the Treasury Department continues to look forward to seeing these checks go out the door and into the pockets of hardworking Americans, and the president will be meeting with them himself tomorrow on the road in both Ohio and Kentucky, and we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Caroline.
All right, everybody, you have been listening to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at the Daily Press Briefing. A lot of things she commented on, including a lot of questions about the war, and a post specifically that had to do with the escorting of a oil tanker by a U.S. naval vessel through the Strait of Hormuz. Here's what she had to say.
I was made aware of this post. I haven't had a chance to talk to the Energy Secretary about it directly. However, I know the post was taken down pretty quickly, and I can confirm that the U.S. Navy has not escorted a tanker or a vessel at this time, though, of course, that's an option the president has said he will absolutely utilize if and when necessary at the appropriate time.
All right, that, of course, is White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt just moments ago at the White House with the Daily Press Briefing. We care about this because we did see oil actually dip to its lows on that headline. of a U.S. naval vessel escorting an oil tanker. We saw oil down as much as 19%, WTI crude down below $80 a barrel. We are still down on the day, but we're not down as much. Still a decline of about 11% at $84.16 a barrel. So we certainly have seen some reaction in the oil markets. And it's safe to say energy investors, global investors looking for some clarity about this war, especially when it comes to energy markets that have really seen a lot of volatility, but really for markets overall. I want to stay on this for a moment and stay in D.C. And let's get to Joe Matthew. He is the co-host of Balance of Power. Joe, it does feel like we continue to see mixed messaging on the war, whether it's from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, from the president last night, Chris Wright, Energy Secretary, a post up, a post down, Caroline Leavitt then trying to clarify everything. Feels a little bit messy at the White House right now.
I think that's fair to say. And I'll just remind everybody, if you go back to that post that was deleted, Chris Wright said a large oil tanker passed through about 36 hours ago. So for some reason, the Energy Secretary thought this took place yesterday, that this was almost old news at the time that he was announcing it to a group of people in this video. All of that has been deleted. And I'll give some credit to Bloomberg's own Hadriana Lowenkron, who asked that question of the press secretary. Kind of interesting how little she had to say about this, basically referring further questions to the Energy Department. But you're right. As soon as that post hit, Carol, crude oil down to a 7 handle and then jumped back above $80 a barrel when it was deleted. So this kind of confusion is making and losing money for people today. And there are a lot of questions about exactly where the president is himself, having suggested the war effort yesterday was very complete, to use his words. And now Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, says this is now the most intense day of bombing yet. And they are threatening much heavier strikes if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. There is a report out there by CNN that Iran is considering, if not already beginning, the process of mining the strait, which would really change the dynamic here. And the White House will certainly need to have a concerted communications effort at that point.
Yeah, I have to say, to be fair, Nora, you actually sent me a headline too, or somebody, a terminal user who sent you some information about a report that the U.S. intelligence indicates, as you just said, Joe, Iran is preparing to deploy naval mines in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, again, information coming. We were looking for confirmation. But to me, it doesn't say that there's any end to this war, at least at this moment in time.
Well, that's true. And even Republican lawmakers we were talking with on the early edition of Balance of Power, Congressman Stutzman, for instance, did have to acknowledge that this is going to be a longer effort. And, we're likely not talking about days. The president was asked yesterday and pressed in a news conference, how soon could this end if we are very complete? And he said, not this week. That was a redhead on the terminal. That goes to show how close